Well, howdy everyone, and here we go again with another lens review. Today I'm looking at a slightly older Canon lens that a lot of people are really interested in, the Canon 28mm f1.8 USM. It's a full-frame camera lens from the 90s and it's fairly reasonably priced, costing about £350. It has a fast f1.8 maximum aperture, which means that it's great for indoors and low-light photography. It can also give you quite a nicely out-of-focus background, even though it's a wide-angle lens. The focal length of 28mm is quite a wide angle if you're using an expensive full-frame digital camera. It's about as wide angle as you can go before you start getting so wide that your corners are stretched. As a result, 28mm is practical, but it doesn't give you quite the same dramatic images that 24mm or lower can give you. Personally, 28mm is not a focal length that sets my photographic passions on fire, but it's certainly practical. However, on a less expensive APS-C camera with a cropped sensor, this lens is the equivalent of about 45mm. It's zoomed in a lot more, so that's a perfect standard field of view, giving you a nicer emphasis on your subject, rather than a wide angle. It's actually a very desirable focal length, so I would say that this particular lens is of slightly more interest to APS-C camera owners. Another thing to note is that the lens is a bit too old to have image stabilization. Let's look at its build quality. Despite being an older design, this is a very nice piece of kit indeed. It's quite small and solid with a metal lens mount. The only thing that's missing is where the sealing. Its focus ring turns very smoothly and precisely indeed, and you can adjust the focus whether you're in auto or manual focus mode. The lens's front element does not turn or extend as you change focus, which is good news for people who use filters. The USM autofocus motor is lightning fast and makes a quiet whooshing sound. If you're video making, then this lens makes a quiet noise while it's micro-adjusting. It's not really noisy at all, but the sound is creeping in there. Overall, the lens has lovely build quality and it's a pleasure to use. But more importantly, let's look at image quality. We'll start by testing the lens on a full-frame camera, in this case a 20MP Canon 6D. On the camera, I've turned on peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction. At f1.8 in the middle of the image, picture quality is quite sharp, although contrast levels are a bit low. The corners of the image are looking a bit soft and washed out, and even with the camera's correction, there is quite noticeable chromatic aberration on contrasting edges. Quite a weak performance really. Stop the lens down to f2.8 and you get more sharpness and contrast, and the chromatic aberration is a bit more tame, although the extreme edges are still quite blurry. Back in the middle of the image, we see a nice, sharp, punchy picture. Stop down to f4 and the middle is still very nice. However, the lens has a strange sharpness characteristic. Move away from the middle and the lens is a little soft. However, the lens becomes much sharper when you move right into the corners. You have to stop the lens down to about f8 for uniform sharpness across the image field. So overall, the Canon 28mm f1.8 is giving rather a weak performance on a modern full-frame camera, although you can get some good sharpness in the middle of your images. Okay, let's look at its performance on a much more common APS-C digital camera. In this case, a 20MP Canon 70D. Again, peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction are both turned on for these tests. At f1.8, the lens is a little soft in the middle of the image with low contrast levels. It's still a usable image though, just about. However, the corners of the image are downright bad. They're looking very soft, with very strong blue and magenta chromatic aberration. Bear in mind, this is with chromatic aberration correction turned on. Stop the lens down to f2.8 for a little more contrast, but those corners are still weak. However, the middle of the image looks pretty sharp. Stop down again to f4 and you get an extremely sharp picture in the middle of the frame. However, those corners are still weak. Stop down to f5.6 and the corners finally begin to improve, and at f8 the image quality is acceptable there, and even a chromatic aberration seems to be gone. Overall, the lens gives a disappointingly weak performance on an APS-C camera. The chromatic aberration and soft corners are really bad, and the whole image frame is a bit too soft at f1.8. Quite a shame really. Let's move on and look at distortion and vignetting. They're not really a problem on an APS-C camera, so let's look at the performance on full frame. The lens gives a little barrel distortion, but it's not too bad. There's a lot of dark vignetting in the corners of the image though, but to be fair, this is quite normal for a fast, wide-angle lens. You can use peripheral illumination on your camera to get rid of it, or simply stop the lens down to f2.8 and those corners brighten up. So it's a good enough performance for distortion and a little bit weak for vignetting. The lens can focus down to about 25 centimeters, which is reasonably close to your subject. Close-up image quality is sharp enough at f1.8 and much better when you stop down to f2.8, so you can get some really nice pictures of flowers or small pets. This lens doesn't really appreciate working against bright lights, displaying quite a lot of complex flaring patterns. One quite major issue with this particular lens is coma. Coma is when bright points of light in your images get smudged, particularly at wider angles. This picture was taken at f1.8 and on a full frame camera. In the corners you can see that bright points of light look really smudged out, which is annoying for nighttime photography. Stop the lens down to f2.8 to rein it in again. But that's a disappointment, because if you're taking nighttime shots, then you want a camera lens that works well at f1.8. The lens does not really have great quality bokeh. If you look at this picture taken at f1.8, the out of focus background is looking a little bit rough on its highlights. That's another shame, because having smooth bokeh really makes a big difference to your images. Well, let's sum everything up. I'm feeling a bit mean right now, like I should take off my boxing gloves, because this lens's image quality was mauled by nearly every test I put it to. It's not very sharp, it has chromatic aberration issues and problems with bokeh, coma and working against bright lights. What a shame. I wanted to like this lens a lot more. Its build quality is really lovely, and it could have been so useful on an APS-C camera. But if you do have an APS-C camera, then you'd be better off with a Sigma 30mm f1.4 art lens, or even saving up for the Sigma 18-35mm f1.8. But sadly, this is one of the weakest Canon lenses I've ever tested, so I really can't recommend it.